All right, thanks everybody for joining the session on building a carbon impact agent and boosting return on investment with sustainable AI. Out of curiosity, how many of you have done agent development involved in some way or another? Cool. And out of the solutions you've developed, how have you gone about tracking cost? Okay, what was your guess? Okay, perfect. Um, Okay, so that's what we're going to explore today. So I'm going to start very high level, aims and objectives, what an agent is, just to bring us all on the same level, why we want to build a carbon impact agent, and talk about some foundational concepts around prompt translation and standard operating procedures, good data quality and prompts, when we might use low code versus code first approaches. And then I'll go through how I've started to design a very simple carbon impact agent and how I would extend this further. So yeah, the reason I wanted to talk about this is a lot of the AI hype cycle, I guess, is dying down a little bit. And we're a consultancy. We deal with a lot of big enterprise organizations that are literally scrambling at the bit to try and consume lots of different AI solutions, find out which one's the best, which one they have to do the least amount of work for to get running. But that comes with a big overhead cost, which really hasn't been addressed with much concern at the moment, but it can be really powerful, not just from a sustainability perspective, but also from a cost perspective. So I just wanted to share some ideas that I've been working with as to how we as developers, creators of these solutions can start thinking about how we might predominantly with open source tools. So I will share all the initial code on GitHub so we can extend that if we want to. So what is an agent? An agent is an intelligent software service that uses generative AI to understand, decide, and act. And it's really that final part around understanding, deciding, and acting that gives it agency to act autonomously. So why are they useful? Obviously, there's the automation component, enhanced decision making. We can consume a lot more data than us as humans could potentially do, enhancing our decision making capability. Scalability. So we can often start, and we're beginning to see this. I don't know if you guys are, but we start with one prototype, and then it seems to have dual functionality across different business units. And we can extend those to start in a modular way, adding on different capabilities. And then it's also 24/7 available. So most humans need at least 8 hours of sleep. We definitely don't get that most days. But obviously these agents are available all the time. So I'd be kind of curious as to some of the agents you guys have actually been working on. But just to give a few examples, we've got personal assistants, and this is one application that I'm actually going to touch on as one we could monitor from a carbon agent perspective. Research agents is a really common example. A lot of big tech companies put a lot of great blogs and resources around how we could create research agents that a lot of developers started out with. Sales agents. So if we've got quite a broad spectrum of a client base, we want to understand how we can make it personalized, give them that warm, fuzzy feeling, tailor the narrative according to them. So we can nurture our leads using different sales agents. Customer service agents, probably one that we've all had a lot of engagement with, tracking your order, understanding when you're going to get your refund, you've got a faulty item, etc., can all seamlessly be dealt with via agents, a customer chatbot agents without human in the loop, really. And then finally, developer agents. The productivity gains of this one might be quite interesting. We were at New Scientist on the weekend, and Sandy was at a really interesting talk that he was telling me about afterwards. And I guess us as developers often think that generative AI will give us great sample code bases. We don't have to write code from scratch. We just write a really great prompt, and it'll give us much quite enhanced productivity gains. This particular research was actually alluding to the fact that whilst that may be our perception, when we actually tangibly measure that, developers thought they would have a Tedrick giving a lovely welcome there. Developers thought that they would get up to 24% gains in productivity. When they were actually measured, they had a 19% reduction in productivity. And you can often see this. I think it will obviously depend on your experience level, but one thing I've definitely seen is where you're maybe not as familiar with new technology. I think in this day and age, we're all learning new tools and things like that. And you prompt these generative AI tools, and out of the box, try and copy and paste and use those. And it really goes back to the kind of core understanding of you need to understand what the code is doing, because you can get down and stuck in some real rabbit holes.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah, exactly.
Should you have a DevOps agent that's fixing your backlog of issues that is going to say
a lot of time? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think there's definitely different levels of complexity and different levels of experience and how they're used. And I think I'll touch on this a little bit, but that design component I think is critical to how much success you get out of off the back of the tools that you're using as well. Yeah. So I'll just quickly review some common agent architectures. So the one we're going to cover today is this very simple single agent. So we have one model with access to multiple different tools. But two other common architectures that we often see are the swarm architecture, where we have a few different agents with access to different tools offloading to each other and autonomously where they see fit. And a common practice is of the supervisor type architecture. This is where you have one main agent that is offloading subtasks to specialized sub-agents and relaying the information back to the user. So why wouldn't we use just chains of lots of LLM calls as opposed to agents? Chains are typically associated with orchestrated pipelines. They're very predictable. There's not much variability in each of the steps. Whereas agents, they're much more goal driven and they adapt their behavior and the choice of tools that are used according to what that goal is. So just to look at that a little bit further, if we think of an assembly line, we're making shoes or trains, for example, each part of that assembly line will have a very specific goal. It will do the same thing, a very small task repetitively over and over again. It's not really changed, and that's where a lot of LLM change calls would work. In comparison, if we think of a personal assistant, and I've drawn a bit of a diagram down here, where we might have a supervisor agent that needs to monitor our email inbox, define what tasks need to be done, prioritize those tasks, and relay back to the user what has been done. Whereas all the sub-agents underneath it would need to maybe read emails, summarize them, draft responses. We could have a sub-agent that's dedicated to booking meetings, another one that's dedicated to booking travel. And even within those sub-agents, they have access to different tools. So if you're booking travel from the UK to India or the UK to the US, you're definitely not going to use a taxi service. You're going to be doing that by flight. So it needs to have that intelligence to know which tools to use when, and there is some variability there. So when do we want to use an agent versus not use an agent? So we have also, we've got a lot of repetitive tasks that need doing with variability, where we need to manage multi-step and cross-platform workflows. And there's a lot of high volume information retrieval and summarization, which requires that scalability. Where we don't want to use agents, anything that is associated with high risk or irreversible decisions. So typically anything that could impact human life or have detrimental financial impact. Where we've got poor quality or biased data. So the garbage in, garbage out analogy still applies to generative AI, and those are just exacerbated. So we can't expect large language models to fix our data. we need to give it good quality data in order to get good quality results out the back of it. Any task requiring empathy or human nuance, so end of life support, anything around children or social care, again, very risky. We need the human nuance. These models, although there's some research, I think Microsoft actually did some around whether on the movement and the scale towards AGI, whether these models have the capability to show theory of mind. So this is something that humans learn very early on, and it's the concept is we basically understand our own internal emotional state and how that would affect us in the real world. So the interactions we have with other people. And it was shown that sparks of AGI and theory of mind were available in some of the more recent GPT models, but we're not there yet where we're going to offload a lot of these risky scenarios to generative AI models. And then where we have inaccurate standard operating procedures. So if we don't understand how a particular workflow is done by humans step by step, we can't translate that into a system prompt or into any of the tool designs that would enable that agent to be performant. So I'm going to talk a little bit around the LangChain ecosystem. I particularly like it. I think it's quite simple. They also have a range of tools from low code to code first, but particularly we're going to focus on LangGraph. And the reason I like LangGraph is because as we generally increase the complexity and the autonomy of these agents, the reliability of it is generally decreased. But a lot of the tools that we have out of the box with LangGraph enable us to maintain good levels of reliability. So why do I want to build a carbon impact agent? So if we think about foundational models, GPT, Gemini, etc., there's a lot of documentation around how bad they are, how energy intensive they are, and what we're not doing to compensate. So some of the models have been associated with using 1.7 billion gallons of water. GPT-3 took 552 tons of CO2. Although I have been informed that was actually trained on the Microsoft estate. So given that's renewable, it's probably not equivalent to the 300 return flights from New York to San Francisco. But overall, data centers are expanding, and the amount of CO2 emitted and water usage associated with that is quite dramatic, and that's only going to increase. So whilst that's very well documented, so a lot of the remediation efforts. So a lot of data centers are based on renewable energy, that we're using much more intelligent designs in terms of optimizing grids, and we can also do other things like predict climate disasters off the back of it. On the model side specifically, we've got better model compression techniques now. Smaller models are being used. A lot more rigor and practice, good standard practices are being put out around when to use certain models in which scenarios. And then neuromorphic chips, which kind of resemble how the brain works in a much more energy efficient way, are also being designed. So I think on the foundational side and the upstream end of the supply chain, where we acknowledge some of the challenges and have actually started putting in remediation efforts. But on the downstream side, where we're actually building these AI applications and consuming them, we maybe haven't given so much thought. So in the consultancy world where we live, I don't see a lot of green active AI strategy. And the savings from an energy perspective are typically a byproduct of incidental decision making. So choosing a smaller model that's maybe a bit cheaper. But if we were to even just measure the consumption footprint from inference and actually developing these models, the solutions, we might be able to start putting together some really effective remediation steps. So having greener prompts, scheduling workloads. So some of the demo that I'm going to go on to show We'll show how, if you don't need a real-time response, why would you necessarily have that capability built within your design, and even caching responses. So this is something that we've actively been looking at. Is often when these solutions are deployed within an organization, business units will have certain types of questions that they want to ask over and over again. We don't need to send that to the LLM every single time. We can cache those responses and have it in a sort of FAQs type approach. Okay, so a lot of you seem very proficient with agent design, etc. So I'm not going to go through these in a lot of detail. I'll cover just briefly getting the foundations right. So the data, I'm not going to go through in this particular demo a lot of detail around data, but ultimately we obviously want to validate the data quality. We want to make sure it's extracted effectively, and as Laura and I have begun to explore, that can be really complicated, specifically in certain domains like legal, for example. Heavily unstructured data, nothing is really standardized, and it requires a lot of assumed relationships that probably things like knowledge graphs, etc., could help us with. But if we are going down a traditional route, then the chunking and extracting the right entities that can help us enhance performance is something we probably want to look at. I mentioned the standard operating procedure, so breaking down that step-by-step process, because ultimately that's going to translate into understanding the business problem and then being able to put together effective prompts and design better tools. And then finally, prompt engineering. So we obviously want to give the system prompt a persona, an understanding of the types of queries it's going to receive, a template of response, the ability to reflect and reason, and then also examples of how it should react. So like I said, I won't go through this in much detail. It is on GitHub if you want to go and have a look. But this is the translation of how a human would do summarization of a document and how we would translate that into a system prompt. So writing a good prompt, with regards to how we improve performance, there is a whole load of resources around this, which I'm not going to go into in this talk, that go far beyond just the 4 that I mentioned here. But with regards to writing a good prompt, I just wanted to highlight when we actually implement the foundations of a good prompt, we can see the results. So this example is taken from the Microsoft documentation, and you can see where we've given us no system prompt versus the system prompt of you are a seasoned marketing professional that writes advertising copy. The quality of results we get back when it receives a user prompt of write a 1-sentence description of a CRM product is very different. So in the generic approach, we have more of a dictionary type description of what a CRM product is, whereas where we have the persona specified, we can see that it's more tuned and the tone is more reflective of writing advertising copy. So that's something to definitely bear in mind. And then low code versus code first. The ecosystem of AI tools for developers is growing at a rapid pace, and it can be quite confusing, especially when you see a lot of fear mongering around the speed at which you need to adopt AI. You think, should I use a low code or a code first approach? And the short answer is there's probably a place for both. And it depends on what you're trying to do at the current time. So low code are very good, obviously, for speed. It's great for bridging the gap between technologists and business users because it allows both to collaborate. And there's obviously a lower upfront cost. But if we're moving out of prototype into something that we actually want to make scalable, robust, and productionized, then we want to think about a code first approach. So this allows us the full flexibility for integration and control. If we want to then extend and expand that solution, we can do so with the right governance in place, and keep it scalable at the same time. Also, if there is new technology that evolves that we want to move in and out, we can easily test that. So the carbon impact agent that we're going to be looking at today is going to be sitting on top of this legal PA assistant. So we've created a legal PA agent that is doing some very rudimentary tasks to start with. So it's monitoring our email inbox, drafting email responses, booking meeting rooms, and booking travel. Now, this data that we're going to be using, I have simulated just for the purposes of the demo, as opposed to taken from real life. But I just want to make the point that using synthetic data is becoming quite a common practice, especially where we start to evaluate data quality and we realize we don't have it. I think there's a growing plethora of resources around how to do that responsibly. So that's something that we can definitely use to prototype quickly. So I'll show you the telemetry data that we fabricated in this instance. So we've got the task that the legal PA agent is doing, how many tokens it's using, the time it took to complete the generation, the CO2 associated with it. We've got things in there around region and also cost as well. So we're going to create a very basic agent here, which has a few different tools. It has the ability to calculate carbon impact. It has the ability to estimate the cost and the ability to optimize the carbon usage. So a very simple design that we can obviously extend, but this is generally how I've seen a lot of fruitful results, is starting very simple and then building the complexity as we go on. So we're not thinking here around the complexity of the system prompt, how we do effective information retrieval, human in the loop evaluation, testing or monitoring. It's just a very simple demo. So I'm going to take you to the notebook to start with, just so you can see the output. So here we can see a lot of the data that we have fabricated. So we've got our timestamp, we've got our department in which the legal PA agent is sitting, HR, legal, IT operations, etc. What type of task it's doing, booking lunch, drafting a response, arranging a meeting, so forth. The tokens it took, the duration, the region, the energy usage, the cost associated, etc. And obviously, as we go on, we might have different models for different sub-agents that we want to then encapsulate that data as well. So I am using Azure OpenAI, but if you want to develop locally, there are a lot of local available models as well. So we're then setting our tools. So we have our tools defined here. The first one is retrieving the latest telemetry data specified for each task. The next tool is essentially just very simply calculating carbon. This can obviously be expanded. There are a lot of different ways to calculate carbon. We have a cost estimator, and then finally an optimization tool. And in terms of the system prompt, it's very simple at the minute. So we've got, you are a helpful assistant tasked with analysing telemetry data and providing a carbon footprint, cost and optimization recommendations for a legal PA agent. So using LangGraph, we've basically created our assistant and our tools, which looks quite simple. And I've tested here. I'm sure many of you have probably experienced, no one on the business side likes looking at notebooks or terminals for app running. So I've converted this into a very simple chainlet application where we can start showing that user journey a little bit. So we can ask, what is the carbon footprint of draft responses? And we get a very simple answer back. We can say, how could we reduce emissions associated with drafting drafting responses. And this might take a minute or so. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not connected to the server, but
Yeah.
looking at the gap.
Sorry, say that last part again.
Looking at the gap.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And I think Yeah, exactly. And that's where I would be going towards. Okay, so if we take this to the next level, how can we improve it? So you can see in this response that it's given back, this is great. It's talking about log latency of error metrics, prompt compute optimization, regional scheduling, etc., which is great if you're an architect or a developer. But if you're a business person looking at this, like that's not really helpful to me. So we might think about different personas and how we might want to present this. Firstly, back in terms of tone, according to who it is that's engaging with the tool, but also what we want to do. So I think using an MCP server to calculate different types of carbon output, absolutely. But if we want to extend this to maybe even automate some of your ESG reporting, then we'd want to look into different ESG reporting taxonomies, and they're massively unstructured. There's lots of them, and there's lots of crossover, overlaps, gaps, etc. And then there's regulation to consider, and that's where we really could leverage something that's a little bit more sophisticated in terms of how we're extracting that data, the tools that we're leveraging to do different things, and then obviously ultimately cross-validating that as well. So there's definitely a few ideas there around how we could start improving this. But ultimately, I think this, just even from measuring the carbon impact, I think that's a good starting point, and something that we definitely don't do. I think we've just got into the habit of doing a lot of red teaming around our AI solutions before we just unleash them. I think the security and definitely the energy constraints are becoming more prominent as people start to add in more governance around, okay, well, is this performant? Is it reliable? Is it cost effective? Those questions are definitely starting to be asked a little bit more of these AI solutions now. So that kind of brings me to the end. We've obviously covered what are agents, when to use them, how to design effective agents, building a simple agent. We've covered a few around next steps. I'm sure you guys have got loads of other ideas. I'd be really interested to hear them. And I've left a few resources there. The Azure architecture blog's really interesting, actually, because it's focused on the developer perspective and how we can start designing in a much more sustainable way. I can't actually remember. I think it's been a while since I looked at that one. Let me go on it. Oh, these are the 4 tools that you can use. So these are open source tools that you can use to calculate emissions. So the MLCO2 calculator is great. I think there's one that's been extended specifically for generative AI. It might be Code Carbon or the Carbon Tracker. But essentially, these are all different packages that you could use in the open source community to start looking at how you measure carbon impact. So that's another thing. Some of the tools could leverage some of these packages, right? Did anybody have any questions or anything that they think might be worth talking about a little bit more further? Go for it, Sandy.
I such like
So you're gonna ask it to me, so I'm gonna know. Okay.
Yeah. So Microsoft have very good central AI policies.
Yes.
I can marry that to an ESG and make it social governance static, that also that they have like an AI implementation that adoption framework marries really well to social governance that they are ignoring every part of the environmental. And it's like this to both their product team and the and their marketing teams, both frankly. So I guess what is your opinion for an AI strategy for an internal perspective? What would you think handle from the environmental perspective?
It depends on the company, but a lot of the customers we're working with, I think the thing that concerns me is that whole fear of missing out. So there'll be, and especially in large organizations where you get shadow AI going on and a lot of different silos on the data side, never mind the AI. I think bringing that to a convergence point around, okay, let's I think speed, first of all, would definitely be part of it, because I think that's one of the reasons that we encourage shadow AI to come about, because things don't move quickly. People get frustrated. They see these flashy tools and they're like, I want to use it. So you'd want to incorporate something around speed, performance, and just even measuring, like I've said, the actual impact to start with, because I think it's a bit of a trade-off. Yes, you want performant results, but you also want to make sure that's balanced with cost. And so if it's something that's not really going to, any AI strategy needs to be married to their business strategy. And if you're building an AI solution that's not really going to impact that, why are you prioritizing using the flashiest, most performant tools? So that's probably the 3 areas that I would focus on. Yeah, go for it.
And I'm going to so maybe that's to be made about because that's so we have the well-updated framework sustainability and all of our sustainability guidance based on creating software foundation and green and I mean, there was looking people in the UK and people coming globally worked them on but having the GSF frameworks that AI applications looking to traditional software applications. So we have simple answer is we follow the Green Software Foundation. And then in our documentation, you should be able to find what that means. It can be short sense, so you can have to translate that again. But the idea or the methodology that we're following is to try and highlight sustainability impact across the whole life cycle of your application. So at the moment, we can show you your relative carbon emissions when you're running fixing initial. So you see what the emissions, and that's the impact weighting, but again. And the Azure carbon optimization is based on the source level. And in AI Foundry, there's specific sustainability metrics. And because you actually the energy usage of which you can hear these are using. And we have assessment tools so you can assess things on premises and what the carbon reduction will be on the individual. And the bit that's kind of next on the roadmap is to make it so renewable rating applications and to actually inform you of certain choices you can make before you actually deploy it and create those carbon operations. But we did have we had some of our UK Software Foundation and development as in before NCP services things and adding the GitHub Copilot that did sustainability checks based on the Free Software Foundation. And then GitHub just implemented that in there. And then also so if you have so pilot, you can say now make the code sustainable and it should work through that and stuff. What to do. And another thing we just released out with operations is API gateway, which is a big factor of any kind of AI Foundry application. Now has the capability of creating you to route your API traffic to basically data center regions with a lot of the carbon intensity. So you can say the carbon intensity is rated like on that map. You want to say send all of our API to that green region.
Yeah.
Then you'd be able to make that.
Oh, that's really cool. Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's so the issue with Microsoft is that it's 100,000 different product groups all working there little bits, bits and pieces. Which is why you need people like me to care.
Yeah.
Is there any plan to push any of that into like the code sphere? Is that it's always felt for me like as soon as you move out of the building your own applications into like pure SaaS products, that understanding what is that sense like I build something internally and forget what the impacts actually what's everything. But if it's just like same workload studying Copilot, is there any plans to try to bring in you that so you understand that to save it? Yes, studying currents. And that was on a part, maybe like 9, you might,
Oh, soon then.
so,
Yeah.
Clothing out in the pill. But it's a much more difficult thing to measure because it's not just looking at usage on purpose. And then, not my time involved in it in any way, but can see that's very common.
Yeah, go for it.
And that there'll be basically, hopefully, other parts of space coming.
Wow, that'd be really good.
And so it's one of the admin services once.
So if we log into GitHub Copilot and we'll log in to tell us how much for free we are on it, we are working with that per person maybe.
Or that's so as a developer, you can setting it up co-pilots. And what changes I made to this bonus in this week, I automate via use desktop missions in visual regions or trees you should be to deploy this workload or should kind of within time zones so it will understand that terminology and it will make suggestions. But you also then have to think about just the code level at the operations level because
I was just wondering, we used it inline, we don't use it as more prompt-based, we use it inline. How much does it use? Some days it needs more, some days.
so
Just as it's sort of usage.
that kind of elements of the securing bit and the fact that you're doing it from your
ID.
in your own ID and your things, that means there's a bit of a gap. So in any of our statistics, it kind of uses an assumption-based industry kind of average for network traffic and what an end user device would be. So it's idea of them before. But it's always kind of something I mean two lines of because you can say, right, Microsoft Azure, the whole organization, they need to be net zero by 2030. And this year, all of our data centers run on 9% renewable energy market risk. So actually, it's running your app in Azure. It's not causing, it's not increasing carbon emissions, the bandits. Then it's more about the impact you can have is on the using application when something outside of Azure areas you can't control. That's where actually optimizing the code will make a big difference. There's a really good use case that is in our documentation. If you look up Xbox sustainability, you'll see some reaching states of the kind of tweaks they made that made substantial differences. Because each usually your app data center will be like 20% of your emissions, and the rest of the emissions will be caused by people using your app that's outside the data center. This is made by Netflix as well as by organizations.
Yeah.
Small as well, like kind of chooses the best whether it's something that's in development. Yeah, so there's the model you said, and I'm not sure if it's still Monday pretty good or GA, but it's if you click the choose and buy button in Copilot, then it'll be it's released.
You more to the video.
Waters.
Yeah, me too. And I would say that water usage isn't as much of a concern for an actual data center because we make sure that when we build the data center that we don't have a negative impact on the local water supplies. Assuming if you're such a almost all some so stay so water positive, carbon negative by 2030, mixed positive by 2030, zero waste by 2030. And so since 2012, we reduced our water consumption by 8% in our data centers. And our new kind of full data center closed cooling system reduces it in about
So it's got zero after the operational use. So that always gives me confidence. And that's what you hear with kind of news cycles. Whenever I hear some kind of horror story, I'm looking to see what Microsoft use cases. So
is it the case for all the data centers throughout the world, or just only a few companies?
Banana, yeah, any Microsoft data center, yeah, even the ones. So some Microsoft data centers Microsoft owned, other ones are owned by a different company, but they have to follow Microsoft standards.
Do you know how Microsoft compared to other cloud vendors from the AI sustainability point of view?
I would say, I'm like to say it was like AWS, we're all going to be pretty, because we're so highly efficient, because energy costs us money. So even before, Microsoft been doing the same as for a long time, but any IT covered data centers trying to make them more efficient. So they're squeezing more value out of the energy they're consuming. So the big difference is comparing a hyperscaler to just an open data center or your own data center. You're simply using the DR kind of the miles down the road.
Yeah.
You see like the big dramatic changes. So I don't know. And so always that compete game between the top three. So if one person does something, I go, we'll try and catch up and match it.
Yeah. You might not be able to share, but in terms of how Microsoft measure their own carbon impact, is that broken down on the AI side of things? Because I imagine there's loads of AI development that's continuously going on. How is that kind of offset within the strategy? Visibility report, yeah.
So we're updating for that as we base on that to be updated, and then between reports and release and the blog posts and that kind of thing. So yeah, last year we saw a slight increase in the AI usage, and this year it's dropped back down again. So we're still we committed to our 2030 goals, which means that our people in our legal teams think that we can still achieve those goals. So that's really
that's good.
Kind of inspirational, to actually use AI to help solve some of these problems. So I think we can talk about that.
Yeah.
I've been really focused on the last 18 months, and there's still every week I'll find a new team that's doing a different sustainability project, which is set up a little hackathon, and I saw things that I really hope become published themselves. But it's really good to see that important action and new products to our data centers are tremendous. So
yeah, definitely. Go for it.
So you used a wholly open source tech stack.
Yes.
All of the language, whatever.
Yes.
And Streamlit.
Yeah, Chainlit. Yeah.
So if you had to try, so Microsoft have got their own CPAs.
Yes, they have.
So if you had to try and map comparable services, a lot of people are doing building stuff using open source tools. What do you think would be the closest profile you could use in the Microsoft world? And are there any gaps that you feel like Microsoft could work on with their SDKs? Front ends like Streamlit, Chainlit, all of these things which make testing really easily.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. Around extending, are there any comparables to open source on the Microsoft stack? I haven't explored it in depth. I know Microsoft have their own agent SDK. I haven't. I know you have used that extensively. I initially just gravitated naturally towards LangGraph because I think it's developed by the Python community. It is very user friendly. A lot of the functionality comes out quite quickly in comparison. In terms of testing, the one thing I would say that I actually prefer the Microsoft like AI Foundry for is the evaluation side. I think the workflows that you get for evaluation out of the box, specifically for the metrics, are really easy to use, and you get very quick results. There are obviously like RAGAS and DeepEval, and even I guess Langsmith and LangFuse, that you can use within the open source community as well, which are still very easy. They're just a little bit more, I guess, setup. Whereas within Foundry, you can do that really easily. So I do rate the evaluation capability that Foundry gives you.
I haven't been really following the open source community for AI and the hype cycle with big nice for open source tools, and that was lost in again.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we got a framework to see. Yeah, but so just sorry, moving away from like round the back completely. I mean, so new part of
Yeah.
So sort of spark. But in terms of how you see the open source community, it seems to me like there's new tools all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
It seems very, very fragmented, or it's
it's piecing. Yeah.
Contracts. How do you decide what you're starting like this spotless final?
It's a very good question. I mean, even when I started looking at all of the evaluation frameworks that are out there, deciding which one to use, I usually the way I decide, at least, I'm not sure, I can't speak for the masses, but I'll look at like the top 3 that are the most popular, and they're generally the most popular for a reason, and then I'll try to use them. And whichever one is the easiest to use and gives me the best results is the one that I'll gravitate towards. But I think the whole AI ecosystem as a whole is so overloaded with different tool choices, you can really quickly become overwhelmed with, what do I use here? The amount of like the big tech vendors are constantly rebranding things. That like Foundry's changed dramatically in just 2 years. So I think it is hard and overwhelming to keep up. But yeah, I think I try to remain focused on what I'm doing, and then whatever is performant and effective and quick for what I'm doing, that's what I'll use.
You seen any changes in the last couple of years? I remember at the start of this, everybody was raving about Langchain. Even though when I looked at it, it was sort of like 5,000 issues.
Yeah.
With across 400 little contributing, and just like elated.
Yeah.
Have you seen any trend shift away from these the starting point for OSS and thinking? You know,
the trends that I see are people that come from a traditional data science background gravitate towards Langchain because it's written in a similar way, and the functionality is very easy to pick up in a similar way you'd use any kind of Python package for a data science workflow. A lot of the that are moving into AI tend to use a lot like semantic counter. You go to a lot of the Microsoft conferences, you definitely see that divide. And I think I don't think one's necessarily better than the other. Like a lot of the Langchain community events, I know Microsoft recently did one. It was so oversubscribed, it was insane, because everyone wanted a chance to speak about Langchain and get their voices heard. So I think it just depends maybe where you started from as well. There is a lot of cross-pollination of skills at the minute. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot of things saying like that now where big tech can't capitalize on the market, and it's supported. At the end of the day, it's using our services. So you can realistically use semantic about right. No, but they were cost effective for the source, but we want to make sure that we're supporting these things that are secure and efficient. And so I think we're seeing a lot more of that in the market, that there's a bit more collaboration who runs open source projects with companies. But you didn't have accessing the arts of the
Okay, cool. Any other questions? Okay, I'll post the link to GitHub, which will have the slides and the resources and everything on there in the meetup chat bit at the end of the page in the comments. But
Yeah. So I feel like every time I go to and really interested and really drive sustainability. And there are like if there's ever a sustainability it's always on the like engaged stage, like the little one. And so people probably like in one of the big auditoriums. It's really frustrating. Like, even when we speak to like tech leaders, right? Like CFOs, CEOs, CIOs, they're not interested. Yes, chief sustainability are, but I really struggle to get people.
Yeah, I find it really frustrating that there's not as much engagement around sustainability. I get that climate change is a huge problem and it sometimes feels like you don't have the agency to impact change. But at the same time, it's like a lot of like this is the big revolution. And yes, the big tech vendors are using renewable energy, etc. But consumption and other parts of the architecture, maybe not. And there's a lot of repeatability and wastage that isn't really considered. I think people will always go to like regulation, but I don't think that's going to move the needle. Like a lot of people, like the whole ESG thing and how that moved into CSRD and those kind of regulate. It was seen as a tick box exercise, and how can we get around actually doing anything like tangible, as opposed to really having impactful change. And I think that's variable across industries as well. So when we were working in sustainability, we did a lot in the built environment space, and their profit margins are tiny. It's like 1%, 2 to 3% at most. So strategically, they're not going to want to invest in making things more renewable, even though the downstream effects of what they do have huge climate impacts. So I'm not entirely sure how we address that. I think it has to be tied back to financial reward, which I think is one of the reasons I'm a really big fan of Sustainable Finance Live, actually, because you get that cross collaboration between technology, energy experts, different domains, as well as the finance people. And it's those instruments that I think will ultimately allow us to impact change. Otherwise, it will just seem like a really big problem. Yeah.
Not that much. Is that the companies that we're speaking to, it's like, okay, cool, you're thinking about this, but are you thinking about how to build it sustainably? No, it's just if we don't do it, we're going to get back behind the market.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not baked into
Sustainability, the number of tokens they have used, and then
so that in the data that I'd created, that's basically how it was working. If you look at for each of the tasks that it was doing, it calculates tokens, and then with the region and the time, you can work out what is the associated energy with it. Obviously, depends on what vendor you're using. But if it's an on-prem solution, for example, in security and defense, etc., then that might be more of a consideration.
The things you have a explain that as sustainability routine, maybe that reporting, but the a couple of years ago, business was saying how we transform our business by sustainability, but now it's more how can we make sure we can be resilient and stay alive, and we can understand economic climate. So, but I know that changed the actual people underneath the choices they make. They say in economic enterprise strategies still have like a sustainability or ESG goals that being implemented. Developments Least. But it's yeah, it's and it's that like it goes out very much with progressive routes kind of same city in the all the way up the league for reading all the rest of second. Third, big unit for it but all groups with used for full big those for me. That short and follow it's going to make them and check with me things all the time and good stuff during the